Hello, Christy. Nice to meet you. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all here, and thank you for joining. We are going to wait for a couple of minutes until everybody join us, and we are going to start the show. And at first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Ariel and his approach and how we are going to run this session. And after that, when everyone is here, we are going to ask Ariel to join us, and we are going to start the show. Okay, we are going to wait for a few minutes. Ariel, thank you for joining. Nice to meet you. I'm going to send you the request in a couple of seconds after everybody joined the show and I talked a little bit. من یه منظور خیلی کوتاه چند جمله فارسی هم صحبت میکنم. این جلسه در واقع لایو اینستاگرامم راجع به الکساندر تکنیکه که در واقع روی فعالیت کل بدن در حین نوازندگی تاکید داره و نشون میده که در واقع ما چجوری باید در حین نوازندگی کل بدن اون رو استفاده کنیم، نه فقط قسمت دستو و چجوری این اتفاق میفته. ما در مورد این رو صحبت خواهیم کرد و اینکه اریل یکی از با سابقه ترین مدرسای الکساندر هستش. 32 ساله که الکساندر درس میده و 22 ساله که به صورت تخصصی و با موزیسینا کار میکنه. حالا جای مختلفی بوده، خودش از فیلادلفیا امریکا بهمون اضافه شده و امروز باش صحبت خواهیم داشت و صحبت خیلی خوب. من دیگه از این بیشتر فارسی صحبت نمی‌کنم چون مخاطب انگلیسی هم بهمون اضافه میشن، سخت میشه براشون. خب I'm going to talk a little bit about Ariel Weiss, our special guest today. She is an experienced Alexander teacher with 32 years working in as an international Alexander teacher, and for the last 22 years she has been practicing Alexander teacher on musicians. She's currently in Philadelphia, United States, and it's my honor to ask her here for this live show because I'm sure that I'm gonna learn a lot from her because she's really experienced in this field, and we are going to discuss different situations that we are gonna face during our performance as a musician. And I have my guitar aside, and during the show there are sometimes that I'm gonna use my guitar to show you the things that Ariel tells me, and we are going to check everything from feet to head and the necessity of Alexander technique and in fact similar techniques for musicians, because musicians are athletes of small muscle, but they never think of their performance and their career like a professional athlete. For example, if we check the let's say soccer players or any other athletes, we understand that they always have some fundamental exercises that would help them during the journey, but for musician it's not like this. We just they take our instrument and start playing, which is awful. In fact, we never warm up, we never cool down, we never have fundamental exercises, and we never think as a professional career to our instrument, and we always have problem with it. And some of us face injuries that they might be career ending, which is awful. And I believe all of us should have information about these approaches that would help musicians all around the world. Okay, if there's any question, just type it here, because in a couple of minutes I'm going to add Ariel as our special guest here, and we are going to start the session formally. Is there any question? Okay, I think there's no question. Okay, Ariel, I'm going to add you here, and Ariel, do you see? Okay, Yasaman is with us, and she's going to write the questions for برای بچه‌ای که داخل ایران هستن. بچه سوالاتون رو فارسی هم اگه بنویسید مشکل نداره، من ترجمه میکنم و اریل جوابشو که داد باز مجددا ترجمهش میکنم. Okay, please ask her about stage fright and energetic side of performance. Okay, of course. Yasan, would you please write that, the stage fright? Okay. Any other question? Yes, we are going to save it, of course. It's important to us, you know, we have a special guest. Of course, we are going to save the life. Okay, any other question? Okay, Ariel, do you see a request on your Instagram page? Here, you are in live, yes? Let me find you here, and I'm going to add you. Okay. No. If you accept it, you are going to join us. Oh, hello.
Hi, Hamed.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to see you again. Thank you so much for your invitation to join today.
Thank you so much for being our special guest. I believe that today we are going to learn a lot from you as an experienced Alexander teacher. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Hamed.
How
It's such
you?
a delight.
Is everything all right?
Yes,
Thank
you're
you.
breaking. Yeah, it's a little glitchy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I have your picture and your voice. Is my picture frozen or something like that?
It's kind of stuttering a little bit, but I can hear you. I think we're okay.
Okay, are you connecting from laptop or mobile phone? Which one did you choose?
I'm on my phone.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, Ariel, let us know about yourself.
Well, I started studying, oh, thank you. I started studying Alexander technique as a young dancer in college. And I didn't even understand that I needed the help. But when I went to this workshop, the teacher helped me balance on one leg. And this is something dancers train a great deal. And I wasn't very good at it. And in fact, I was working so hard trying to balance that I was actually throwing myself off balance. And I didn't really understand that. And when the teacher guided me with his hands and talked to me about not holding my balance, but actually allowing the balance, I had such a profoundly different experience. It completely changed the course of where I would live and what I would want to do for work. And I haven't stopped. I haven't stopped exploring since those early days because that toolkit worked better. It worked better than what I was doing. And it was so shocking. I sometimes call this work the cheater's method because it feels like I'm not working hard enough, but it actually works better. So that's my way of teasing myself that I'm cheating. So that's
nice
how I
name.
started. Yeah, the cheater's method. So I've been teaching now for 32 years, and quite fortunately, 22 years ago, was invited to co-teach at the Curtis Institute of Music here in Philadelphia. And at first I just worked with opera singers, and I'd actually never been to an opera. It was quite an extraordinary way to get exposed to opera in little tiny practice rooms where I felt like a human tuning fork. You know, I almost got blown out of the room. But I've learned a great deal from all of my many students over 22 years, and am so interested in how musicians train, and so interested in the life of a performing artist, which I understand as a dancer. So I understand some of the challenges, but I also am a lay person, which is good because I don't get trapped inside of the information you all know. I get to come and just watch your movement. I go to the orchestra and I watch how musicians move. And I listen to the ideas behind the coordination. And I'm looking for the patterns of interference. Because just like in my experience, when I got rid of my interference, my balance improved. Interestingly enough, my enjoyment of dancing also returned. And I love to help musicians get out of their own way, because not only do they play better, not only does their technique improve, but they start really thinking more musically and being able to access all that expressivity. No one wants to play music to be accurate. It's a waste of time, right? We don't want to play notes. We want to play with our souls, and we want to reach and express to an audience. And so what I love about this toolkit is it's very dynamic that way. So I haven't looked back. I was organizing a music conference for 3 years to show musicians how Alexander technique would help. And it's really become a great passion of mine. So thank you for letting me talk to more musicians.
Thank you. Thank you. It was perfect. Nice story. And just let us know, how long had you been practicing dance when you participated on that special class?
So I first was introduced to Alexander technique in college. So I'd already been dancing probably 15 years. And interestingly enough, people think that as a dancer, I know more about my body. But in some ways we know less, because we learn very externally. As dancers, we look in mirrors and we don't really train by sensation kinesthetically. We train by what things look like. And in some ways that puts us at a disadvantage. It's a different disadvantage than musicians. Musicians just aren't plumb taught much about your bodies at all. And if you are taught something, you're taught very locally. Hands.
Yes.
Vocal folds, very microscopically out of context local information that's often very imagistic and not physiologically accurate, which can lead to some problems. It can lead to a lot of problems. So in my, I call it myth busting. So one of my colleagues that I had a lesson with me this week. I love the simplicity of what she said about her work. She said, what you think is what you get. And that's exactly right. In Alexander technique, we more carefully craft the aim. Because if you're crafting a musical aim that doesn't include your instrument, so Hamed, your guitar is not your instrument. You think that's your instrument. And it's beloved, and it's certainly important to help you play music. But you are actually the instrument, and your guitar is the equipment, because that guitar can't play itself. And so that partnership between all your dynamic movement and the guitar is what makes beautiful music. But we don't train that way as musicians, right? You're focused on the music, you're focused on the instrument, the guitar, the instrument, and you're focused on maybe the colleagues that you're playing with. And we don't learn about your moving pieces. So that's where Alexander teachers really help a lot.
Wonderful. That's really useful. I myself remember that before getting, to know MuseMuscle and Alexander technique and doing some research in this field, I was just using, my fingers, which was awful, and I was in pain somehow. There were technique barriers, and someday I read this saying. It said, when the techniques ends, the music begins, which was really important for me. Yes.
That's beautiful.
And I started to think about it. Okay, what's the problem? We are always practicing the technique, but what about the music? It's not music. We are just, like a person who is running, but he doesn't know the destination. He's just running, and it's awful. What should he do that? I started to think about it, and I became familiar with different methods around the world, and finally with you here, which is, of course, my honor. Okay, Ariel, let us know a little bit about the Mr. Alexander. What happened that he started thinking about this stuff, the kinesthetic sense, the coordination? What happened?
So Mr. Alexander, Frederick Matthias Alexander, we refer to him as FM, was an Australian-born actor, and he was born in 1869. And as a young man on stage, he ran into a problem. And it was a disabling problem in that he would start to lose his voice while on stage. And if you can imagine just how distressing that would be, and I want to let you know that it's a very common problem. So when I teach master classes around the world and I ask a room full of singers or actors, how many of you have ever lost your voice while on stage? The average response that I get anecdotally is half the room raises their hand. That's a lot of people having that same problem. And it's not talked about a lot. There's a lot of shame with musicians about injuries. There's a lot of encouragement to just ignore it and push on. And if there's one thing I want all of our audience members to hear today, I so loudly and proudly want to encourage you not to do that. It can end a career. The pain is there for a reason. It's information. It's telling you something is wrong. So Mr. Alexander had this problem as a young man. And when he sought help, he was told to go rest. And when he went to rest, he would be fine. His voice would come back. But when he returned on stage, the problem came back and he would lose his voice. And so as a young man, he made an extraordinary decision to figure out what was going on as he recited on stage. What he figured out was that it wasn't, if I may update his language for a moment, it wasn't a problem with the equipment, with the hardware, because if he rested the equipment, if he rested his voice, he was okay. It was an operating system. It was a software problem. Yes, it was how he was using the equipment. So Mr. Alexander called the manner of his use. You know, he was a Victorian kind of era guy. He was speaking in a different language. So the manner of his use, how am I running the equipment, not just the equipment. So we all know, you know, some of us, for a guitar player, maybe it's having longer fingers might be helpful. I don't know, might be. For piano players, that's a good thing, but not all pianists have big hands. And some of them are super talented, right? So it's not just the equipment, it's how you use the equipment. Yes, that's why we train, right? And so what he did was he embarked on this rather a lifetime journey of self-observation and discovery and experimentation. Because when he first set about, he literally sat in front of 3 mirrors to watch himself, and he started to recite. Right, whatever he was reciting. He was a Shakespearean actor. But what he noticed at first, Hamed, was nothing. Absolutely nothing. But luckily, he didn't stop. He didn't quit. And so I also want to encourage our audience members to be curious and don't give up. It's my best advice. Be curious and don't give up. Don't decide that playing has to be painful. Don't decide that you're just never going to be a better player or singer or artist. There is no ceiling. There's no limit to our integration. Curiosity is the best tool to lead. So he sat down and watched himself. And eventually, watching and watching and watching and seeing nothing, he finally noticed what he called a pattern of interference. A pattern of interference right before he went to speak. He gasped. And you'll see this all the time, especially if someone's excited. Oh yeah, right. So that tightening, if you do it with me for a moment, I want you to feel what happens.
Yes, yes. Some muscle contractions here and here.
Yes, your neck muscles contract. And when that happens, your head is getting drawn in towards your body. Kind of like a turtle, right? When you scare a tortoise, it disappears into its shell. And so we do that too. It's called our startle response. And, you know, we're living in startling times. There is much to be startled by. But when we contract and go into our tortoise shell, it's a lot like putting a handbrake, a parking brake on our vehicle, and then hitting the gas. So we're adding resistance, and then we're adding momentum. And what you get from that is you wear your brakes out, and you wear your tires out, and you waste a lot of gas. It's extraordinarily inefficient. It handles terribly if you've ever tried to drive your car like that. We would agree that's not the optimal way to run that machine. So unwittingly, Mr. Alexander, FM, uncovered the way that he was applying a pattern of interference, a habit that he didn't know he had, right? Before he went to speak. So that's the beginning of the story. Then it took him a lifetime because he said, well, I should not do that. Eureka, I figured out the problem. Now just don't do it. So he would say, okay, I'm going to recite and I'm not going to throw my head back and tighten my neck. And then all of a sudden, his habit would come sneaking right back in. So he figured out this whole process for first uncovering the pattern and then redirecting into his own buoyant balance. And when he did that, not only did his voice work fine, but interestingly enough, his whole health improved. He was kind of a sickly young man. He had respiratory problems, and I think he had circulation problems. He was kind of sickly. And what was interesting was that he got rid of the interference. It didn't just improve vocal production, it actually improved his whole health and well-being. And that's a beautiful thing as an Alexander teacher, that someone might come to me with a particular problem. They often do, a problem to solve, which I love. Alexander technique is a toolkit to solve a problem. But then they may uncover all kinds of other wonderful things that they didn't know they were hampering. So it's a very holistic, systemic approach to coming into balance. And we all work better when we're in balance.
Thank you. Wonderful. It was really useful, and I really agree. I couldn't agree more, you know, because today that's the same problem happens to musicians a lot. They usually are injured due to performance-related injuries, and or RSI, repetitive strain injuries. And what they do, they go to the doctors, to physiotherapists or chiropractic, and what they receive from them is not, you know, momentarily, and they cannot have it for their lives. And that's why when they come back to their instrument, they usually, you know, experience another setback, which is awful. You know, they usually lose their motivation, and they cannot, you know, continue anymore. They say, okay, we have to let it go. But the problem actually is, as you mentioned, is their instrument, their body. And the reason is that they don't know how to use it, in fact. And they just go, okay, I want to know, for example, as you mentioned, a car, I say, okay, my car is broken, the tire is flat, I just change the tire. But in fact, we have to change the place of the car, you know, and we have to direct it in another direction for a better experience. And I believe Alexander technique is wonderful in this case. Okay, I was reading about you, and I found that that your teacher was, you know, a wonderful teacher, and had, of course, a specific approach. Okay, would you please tell us about your teacher and the method and the approach that had?
I would be happy to. I would be honored to. So Marjorie Barstow was the very first graduate from Mr. Alexander's very first training course. So when he figured out how to help people, he then took in a small class of people to train to teach his work. And Marjorie was one of the only Americans to train with Mr. Alexander. She was from Nebraska. And I had the great fortune to meet Marge when she was 86 and still traveling the world to teach. Lucky me. But she was a rebel. The American in the group was a rebel. And so what Marge did when she came back to the States was she was asked to teach at a university. And when she got there, Alexander technique is taught around the world. I forgot to look and see if there was, I think there might be one teacher in Iran. That's not very much for such a big country. But we do teach online, so there is work available to all of you.
I think Mrs. Mowahed is here, Azin Mowahed.
Okay, great.
I saw your connection on LinkedIn, yes.
Wonderful. But Marge was given this opportunity to teach in a large group, but Mr. Alexander had only taught private lessons, one-on-one. And most of Alexander technique around the world is taught most commonly or classically one-on-one. But Marge wasn't classical. Marge had an opportunity, and she started teaching in groups. And in fact, when I would travel to Lincoln, Nebraska every summer to study with her, there would be 80, 90 people in a group watching Marge teach. And so this is quite different. And what I want to say about that is if I'm sitting in a room with you one-on-one, and Alexander teachers use their hands to guide movement, it's quite easy for you to get wooed and depend on the guidance of my hands. But that's not what Mr. Alexander wanted us to do. Mr. Alexander didn't want to train people to get you dependent on my hands to show you where balance is. The experience of me guiding you with my hands is to get your own thought process, the craft of your aim, working more efficiently. When my hands do that, then I'm using my hands well. When I'm using my hands to let you be dependent on them, I personally don't think that's what we're here to do. And so Marge had to learn how to teach in a different way to get everyone's thinking going in a way that other teachers didn't figure out how to do. And some are still resistant, may I just say. but it's so interesting to me now that the only way we can teach is online. I feel like people who study with Marge are at an advantage because we already knew what I want to do is direct your thinking. And I still know how to do that online. Whereas if I think the magic it's not magic, guys, it's training. It's not magic in my hands, it's training. And the training is to know what I'm doing with my coordination and to help you figure out what you're doing with your coordination. And it's not physical coordination, it's mind-body coordination. Mr. Alexander called it our psychophysical whole, the use of our psychophysical whole. And so that's mind-body. So Marge taught in groups, and she was actually a rebel in a whole other way as well, related. She had this big group of people, and she didn't want to sit and talk at them. And so she'd ask them, what would you like to do? It is the quintessential Marge invitation. And so she started teaching her students what we refer to as inactivity. So Mr. Alexander helped people sitting, and Mr. Alexander helped people standing, and getting in and out of a chair, and walking. And that was pretty much it. A couple of other small, what we call procedures, but those are the classical procedures. And Marge was helping people sing an aria, play a piano, deliver a monologue. I would get up and dance. As a young dancer, I wanted help dancing. And she would take the principles of self-observation and experimentation. She would take that toolkit of how to uncover patterns of interference and redirect them right into the activity you wanted to do. So that when I went back home and went back to a dance class and I started doing that same movement, I had a kinesthetic experience to refer back to about, oh, I was compressing as I did that movement, but I can do that differently now. And I had a bridge right from the toolkit, right integrating into the activity. And to me, I think that's brilliant. And I still thank Marge daily for showing me that path. And I gladly carry on in that tradition.
Yes. Thank you for telling us about your teacher. And I think teaching people in groups are much more better because sometimes my friend has a problem that I may face in the future. And some of us have some problems that we are not aware of, you know. Say, okay, I have, for example, pain in this place. And I say, oh, I have it too, but I didn't notice it, you know, which is really important, I think. That's why I believe group sessions are much more better than one-to-one, of course.
I think especially, sorry, I was going to just say, especially for performers, because performers, even if you're practicing, if you're performing as a solo artist, you're still in conversation with an audience. You're still in conversation with a group. And so getting artists and performers to understand what their coordination is, not from what I call skin in, that's being self-conscious. And no artist wants to be self-conscious going on stage. Your best performance didn't happen when you were self-conscious. Self-awareness is something else. And self-awareness works really well. So if I'm getting a lesson and I'm in a group and I'm staying with the group instead of like trying to figure out where you put my head, If I'm staying present in that room, then I'm, again, integrating what it is I want to do, right? I'm not separating it out. Same thing about technique and artistry. If you train for technique separate from artistry, then you're trying to put it together, right? And it's clunky.
Yeah.
If you understand that the technique is the path that opens up expressivity and artistry, then you have something much more worthwhile.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Thank you. And there was something in your story that you told us. I just forgot it. Let me. What was that? You told us about independence, actually. Imagine that I have participated in a class, and after a while that I'm not with my teacher anymore, I'm playing my instrument. Okay, is there any special, let's say, exercise or something like that that I can use to, rehabilitate if there's something wrong in my playing or performance?
Well,
or it's just a self-awareness,
Yeah, so we like to say that Alexander technique is formless. So there's not, and it's not actually 100% true. He did have certain procedures. But what I like to say is Alexander technique is less about the what, it's more about the how. And so my teaching has shifted a great deal in the last few years. Instead of telling people what to do, which is kind of bossy, I want to create a template for people to really ask the right questions, the productive questions. So questions like, how much force am I using? How much force or energy is needed? So I don't know, here in America, we're a little crazy. We think more is better, right? We have this documentary called Super Size Me, all about our terrible McDonald's and this like obsession with more is better in how we eat, which leads to obesity, by the way, right? So more is not always better, right? More is not always better, but sometimes it is. Sometimes you need more energy. Sometimes you need more speed. Sometimes you need more power. But again, like me, when I was trying to hold on to my balance, more force directed inward wasn't actually achieving what I wanted. So if I ask, is the force I'm applying actually achieving what I want? Right? And Alexander technique provides a kind of template. We look at head balance, because if your head is locked onto your spine, you have lost the agility of the whole. That's just how you're built. That's physiological fact. So one take home for everybody watching right now is, if you're struggling with something, one thing I've noticed about musicians is when you make a mistake, because mistakes happen, right? But what do I watch my students when they do a mistake? They tighten up and they try again. So they add more force and they try to push on through, and usually it gets worse when they do that. Now, never believe anything I say. I'm not a trained musician, but boy, do I watch you guys carefully. And if hunkering down and tightening up and pushing harder works, by all means do it. But if it's not working, try something else, right? So you might say, how free can my neck be so that my head can balance? And where does the force need to be? So for instance, on a guitar, the force is from the pads of your finger depressing strings. So if I'm using force in my neck and my shoulder, I'm actually taking force away from the contact point. Does that make sense? Yes. If I'm tightening, you could do it. You could do it right now with your guitar. Try it for a moment. Yes. And anyone watching, you could, if you're playing a wind instrument, it might be your fingers depressing a key or covering a hole, right? Yeah. String players, it's depressing strings.
Okay.
So if you were going to depress a string, so tighten your neck and pull your shoulder in, like the tortoise. Bring your shoulder in. Bring your shoulder in, and then see what that feels like to depress a string, and also what does it sound like if you pluck or strum when you pull in.
Yeah,
and notice the agility. right? Or lack thereof.
Yes.
Right. So now let your hands be in your lap, or at least one. So bring that left hand down for a moment. Or sorry, your right.
Okay. Yes.
And then as your hand comes to the string, yeah, you're going to let your fingers lead and let your whole arm all the way to your sternum follow.
And let me just do something. Okay. You see my instrument completely now?
Yeah. So you're going to let your fingers lead. You're going to let your whole arm follow. You're going to let your neck be really soft. And then you're going to ask, literally, how much force does it take to depress the string? And only use what you need. No less, no more. How much do I need? And go ahead and depress the strings. And the force is here, not here. And then see how give that a test drive. See what your agility and your sound production is like.
I can really feel it. Yes.
So tell me what you feel, Hamed.
Yes.
What changed?
The difference. Yes, the difference is significant, and they are, I believe, poles apart. The first time that I had a contraction here, my movement was so hard and difficult to actually move my fingers, because I had a contraction here, and it was, you know, coming one by one to my fingers, to my palm, and I could not play freely. But when I just let it go and I started using here, and I just focus on the pressure that I need for, you know, actually pushing the, let's say, the strings. How much do I need here? When I think about that, it's almost nothing.
Well, that starts to feel like a Ferrari. When you feel effortless in your playing, I assure you it's not effortless to do what you do. You've put probably thousands of hours of very focused work. It's not effortless. But when players and musicians and artists look like they're singing and playing effortlessly, usually that's the kind of magical moment, right? And so it's not effortless. It took a lot of hard work, but it's work without resistance. It's work without interference. And the interference is strain. The interference is not giving us what we want, right? It's the lack of interference that lets the artistry shine through. So then you get to enjoy it more too, which is, and then I get to enjoy it more.
Yes. And just let us know about the exercises that you usually give. For example, the guitarist for being more freely in here, and of course in here, because in our right hand there is no problem of being a contraction in our deltoid, which is awful, of course, and it causes fatigue. What do you exactly do when a guitarist is in a is full of contractions and he's under too much pressure? What do? You just tell him, okay, you have to put your instrument aside and start learning about yourself, or you try to teach him what he or she has to do on the instrument?
Well, I work different ways with different people, but one of the things I love to do with musicians is have them put their instrument down and first use their own awareness on their own movement. So we can do a little bit together if you're game.
Yes.
And I'm going to invite everyone to stand up with us.
Okay, everybody try to join, because I had a good experience. The last session I was with Ariel, it was perfect. Okay, join us.
So again, just to be clear about my purpose is most of the time when a musician gets near their instrument, it's like their instrument is hogging all of their attention and they get completely focused on their instrument. And again, I want you to allow your awareness just to start with your own movement so that when you join the equipment of your instrument, it's a partnership, it's a duet. But I find if you already have the instrument in your hands, it's hard to get you to do that because those habits are so strong and so unknown. They're flying under the radar. You don't understand that's what you're doing. So we'll do a very short one now. But what I want you to do is use your eyes to lead with your head, to look over your shoulder. And as you do that, let the movement immediately follow all the way to your ankle joints. So if I don't let my ankles move and I start to move my head, I'll get kind of a pull in my torso. But if I let my ankles move right away, my whole body will follow. So I use my eyes to look out into the space and let my whole body follow. And this is a horizontal plane, and I'm just moving my head freely on top of my spine. So if you put your fingers right in your ears, that's the place where your head nods on top of your spine. We're going to rotate our body underneath our head. We're going to do little punches. So I'm doing horizontal rotation, and I'm freeing at the same place. So instead of moving my head kind of floats, and I move everything underneath my head. So again, my ankles have to be free. My whole body's moving, and I'm just getting that nice free rotation. This is key. Yes, violinists need to rotate. Pianists need to rotate. Trombone players need to rotate. Yes, so this freeness of movement between my head and my spine is key. Now let's do a little bit with our arms. Yes, so a lot of times when instrumentalists pick up their instrument, they lead with their neck and shoulder. They do a little movement into the tortoiseshell to pick up their instrument, and then they lock their arms into place. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a fist as tightly as we can. And I'd like you to watch your fist and just let go, please. Just let go. And do it again, please. You're going to grasp as tightly as you can. And then I want you to watch and see what happens when you simply let go. When I release the tightening, there's expansive movement in all directions. So if I'm standing here and I free my neck, my head is going to expand away from my torso, because my torso is my tortoiseshell. My arms are going to release towards my hands, which right now are towards the floor. And my legs are going to release towards the feet, my feet, which are also on the floor. So I go out and away expansively in all directions at the same time. So instead of raising my arms by bringing my arms into my body, I'm actually going to release my elbows towards my wrists to bring my hands up. So I'm actually going to release. So try that for a moment. You probably don't play standing up so much, but if you kind of mimicked how you pick up your hands to your instrument, or how you pick up your instrument, see if you can tell what's leading. Is it my shoulders coming in, or is it my hands going away from my tortoiseshell to bring up my hands? Right. The other thing is, for any instrument that comes up, so a violin that comes up on a shoulder, or any wind instrument, there is a tendency, a strong habit for you all to go meet your instrument, which is actually chasing it. So you'll find that heads come towards mouthpieces and reeds, right? You'll see heads drop down onto chin rests instead of allowing that instrument to come. Same thing with guitars, dropping down to your guitar. So I find my buoyant balance, and that instrument joins my buoyant balance. Can you imagine that if I knew how to play, this would go a lot better than this?
Yes.
It would be quite different. So we start by warming ourselves up, and then I spend a lot of time with that meeting of worlds, right? How do I join my instrument? How does my instrument join me? And it joins my movement, right? My buoyant movement. No putting the parking brake on before you play. Oh, there you are.
Ariel, do you have me?
There.
How my picture is frozen? Hello.
Hi. Now I can see you.
Thank you. I want to ask you, the last session that I was talking to you in your class, you taught us a wonderful exercise about breathing our neck and locking it. You remember that when we were talking about the body coordination, you just asked us to lock our knees and do the same movement. I found it really wonderful. Can you just yes, teach it once again, and our audiences and our viewers are going to use this wonderful exercise to understand their body coordination?
So you're talking about the action of the knees in walking. Is that what you're asking for, Hamed?
Yes, there was an exercise. You asked us to move our head and lock our knees and lock our ankles.
Yeah. So the idea is that sadly, sometimes in the myths that are taught to musicians, is they're taught to kind of stabilize or hold one place in order to free another place, but actually they're just taught to strain. So if you lock your ankle joints, right, and your knees, and don't let them move, and you try to bend somewhere, right, or if you try to turn like we did in the beginning, there will not be a buoyant response because you've literally kind of pulled the anchor underneath and the boat can't go anywhere, right? Your body can't follow if you've locked it down. So even though you think it's fingers that play your instrument, it's not fingers that play an instrument. And it's not even your whole body. It's your whole being. It's your creativity, it's your empathy, it's your imagination, it's your sensitivity, it's your history, it's your dreams. I mean, I really think of this work in the most holistic way possible. And that's what I love about working with artists, because you guys will go with me there, right? You understand that feeling when we come off stage and magic happened, because that is magic, isn't it? It's something much greater than the sum of the parts. It really is. And it's this beautiful exchange when we open ourselves to all that. You know, all of us know that feeling of walking into a performance space and feeling the energy of an audience. And it's been interesting to me that I can still get that. I'm still getting your energy, even though we're separated by thousands of miles and only have this very glitchy technology that keeps freezing. I can still kind of take in your energy and respond to it. Yes. So, so that's, if I lock down, especially on screen right now, right? If I think I'm only speaking to you from where you can see me up, if I lock my pelvis, right? That changed me. It changed my voice. It changed my presence. So if I unlock my ankles and I let my head come into balance, my resonance opens up, and you actually take me in more three-dimensionally because I haven't locked the system down. This has a lot to do with, I want to make sure someone asked about performance anxiety, and I want to make sure I touch on it for just a moment, if I might, Hamed. Because
stage fright, anxiety.
For one thing, what I want to say is I'm so sad at how hard it is for musicians to talk about it. It's really, it's an area of shame and fear for performers. And again, if you really take a poll, it's a very common problem. And unfortunately, in my experience working on a music conservatory, pretty much people know one tool to deal with performance anxiety: beta blockers. So if a teacher gets a student that's suffering, they'll suggest they go get some. And I'm not telling you not to use them. It's not my place. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to support you. My point is, if you only have one tool, how effective, like I have a tool drawer in my house and I have more than just a hammer. Yes, I have screwdrivers and I have, right? I have pliers and I have different tools for different problems. And what I want to tell you is that usually when people are fearful, what they do is they prepare by hiding, just like the tortoise. So if you watch yourself or watch your colleague or your loved one, when they talk about something they're afraid of, you'll see they start to look internally and they'll tighten their neck and they'll go into their tortoiseshell and they'll go, oh, I have an audition. And then you'll hear it in their mindset. They'll say, I hope I don't mess up. And I say, well, don't prepare that way, because you just prepared to miss the basket. If you were a basketball player and you said, I hope I don't miss it, I hope I don't miss it, you just prepared to miss the basket.
Yes.
So we come out of the tortoiseshell, we look out into the hall. I know you think that's the wrong thing to do, but try it anyway, and then please message me and tell me how it goes. Because I have helped save careers on this one. It's so counterinstinctual. The more scared we are, the more we want to hide. And that increases the tension and increases the discoordination. So if you are able to play, it doesn't come out very well because you just put your handbrake on and then you hit the gas. It's not pretty. It's very clunky, wears things out. And then it doesn't sound right. So then you go more into your tortoiseshell. So we're going to come out into the room. We're going to feel our feet on the floor. We're going to see as far into the hall as we can, even if there's lights. And then you're going to think musically. What do I want? You're going to hear the music you want to play. That's the basket, is to hear it exactly the way you want to play it. So for singers, interestingly enough, you cannot directly control vocal folds. There's no direct, you cannot tell your vocal folds to work like your bicep. It doesn't work like that. But there's a nerve from your vocal folds to your inner ear. You literally sing what you hear. Literally, physiologically, factually, you sing what you hear. All you can do is train your ear. Why do you think musicians do so much ear training? Because that's what actually works. Right? Then you have to leave your Ferrari unencumbered so that you can follow the lead of that beautiful music.
That's wonderful. And you know, when we do something, for example, like this, when we are afraid or anything like that, we are under pressure or in stress, we do something like this. We thought, okay, it comes from our subconscious and we don't have control over it. You know, it's unconscious that we cannot do anything about it. But in fact, if we are aware of the situation and we know about ourselves, as you told us, we can really, prevent them, of course.
Yes, one of the most powerful things you can do if you're feeling nervous or anxious is to come out into the world. So know where your feet are, know where your seat is, look, listen, sense where you are in the world, and understand that that nervousness is just energy. So you don't want to shut it down. You don't want to say, I'm not nervous. Of course you are. You're a human being. You're nervous. But you redirect it and you go, oh, good, I'm excited. Because who wants to be bored and go on stage? No one wants to be bored, right? We want, like, oh, I'm excited. Good. Now use that excitement to craft your aim and know where the basket is. So do not try to shut it down. I'm not nervous. I'm not nervous. That's into the tortoise shell. It's not going to help. It's not going to help. It's going to make you more anxious to try to shut it down. If you welcome it and say, ooh, I'm really feeling excited about this opportunity. Where are my feet? What am I seeing in the world? Where do I want to send my music? Send it to the back of the hall. Send it around the world, because right now the world needs music. Oh my. We really need music and artistry and hopefulness. And so there's a role for all of us to play, isn't there? To share. To share.
Yeah. Yes, that's wonderful. And now that I'm thinking about it, I believe that it really works. because sometimes we are nervous, but the situation is not that much hard, and there's no that much pressure. But because we are used to it, we decide, okay, I have to be something like a nervous person, or I have to be somehow. But because it's out of habit, and we don't know how to handle that. But now that you are telling me about it, I think, okay, let's come out and see the world. Okay, where I am. Okay, where am I? What's the problem? Why should I be nervous? And that's a good idea, of course. And I wanted to ask you something. During you told us you have been practicing Alexander technique for 30 years, and you have been working with a musician for the last 22 years. Okay, could you tell us a special case in musician, for example, a lack of control, or something like that could be career ending? Have you faced any of them?
Well, sadly, several. And one was someone in our Philadelphia orchestra that had such crippling performance anxiety, they were ready to give up and quit. And this one, I noticed every time this musician talked about their anxiety, I saw this strong pulling in of their whole attention, not just physically pulling in, but of their attention. They would get very internal when they talked about being nervous. And so just this idea of looking out and connecting back out, every time I see this musician, they thank me. And they say, I think about it all the time, and I tell all my students, and it helps. And the other story I want to share is a horn player that was having very severe embouchure problems. And it was really on the brink of ending their career. And what would happen is I would work with this horn player, and there was a very particular part of their range that was a problem. So as they got close to that range, they would start to tighten up because they were fearful, right? They were fearful that there was going to be a problem. So they would tighten up as they got close to that range. And so I would very patiently work with this student. And as I would watch them play, as they would start to tighten, I would tell them to pause, and I would help them kind of come back out of the tortoise shell, right? And ungrip themselves, and then proceed from that ungripped place. And interestingly enough, when this student would successfully ungrip, the notes would be fine in that range. The notes would be fine if they didn't grip. And so I looked at that student that day, and I said, well, that tells us something important. It's not an embouchure problem. It's a thinking problem, right? If I can help, I don't know how to play horn. I don't know anything about embouchure problems. Sorry, can't help you. What I can help you with is the thinking problem, that I notice that you start responding to the fear of getting into that range, and you change your coordination. And I can help you learn how to respond differently. Because when that musician came into balance, that range was fine. So I said, it's not an embouchure problem. It's a thinking problem. So I offer that to you all. When you think you have a technique problem, and your pinky won't go somewhere, or you're not going fast enough or loose enough, or whatever the problem is, it's probably not that your equipment doesn't work. It's probably how you're running the equipment. But let that be the good news. Please let that be the good news. Yeah.
Yes. And for the last question, I want to ask you about our daily I believe